Have you ever been thanked for your loyalty in the same breath you're shown the door? It happened to me on a Tuesday. Clear skies, rooftop bar, linen napkins, the kind of place where deals are toasted, not where careers are quietly buried. The CEO of Halcyon Health Tech, a man I'd known for nearly a decade, smiled as he poured me a glass of champagne. His words were measured, rehearsed. "We're going in a new direction," he said. "Fresh leadership, more aligned with our future." I nodded. I even smiled. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already prepared for this moment. Not out of paranoia, but instinct. When you've built something brick by brick, you feel the cracks before they show. For 12 years, I was the ghost behind the systems that kept Halcyon alive. I never sought the spotlight. My name wasn't on press releases, but my fingerprints were on every server, every line of code, every recovery plan that saved them from collapse. Now, they were replacing me. But what they'd forgotten, or maybe never realized, is this. When you try to erase the architect, the foundation doesn't forget, and neither do I. I never meant to stay. That's the part no one ever believes. When I first joined Halcyon Health Tech, it was supposed to be temporary, a way to ground myself after everything had fallen apart. I had just left a career in military systems engineering, a field where precision was survival and trust was currency. But after a mission went sideways and the fallout tore through my personal life like shrapnel, I needed a reset. I landed in the city with a duffel bag, a few certifications, and more ghosts than plans. Halcyon was bleeding out when I found them. A promising startup in medical AI that had expanded too fast and crashed harder. Their infrastructure was duct-taped together after a major data breach, and the CTO had just resigned in the middle of a compliance audit. They hired me as a contractor to stabilize things. No benefits, no onboarding, just an office with flickering lights and a team of 6 engineers who looked more like survivors than employees. But I saw something in the chaos. Potential, yes. But more than that, necessity. These weren't systems that could wait. They were processing clinical trial data, diagnostic models, sensitive patient records. Failure here wasn't just financial, it was ethical, even dangerous. So I got to work. Quietly, relentlessly. The kind of work you do not because it's glamorous, but because it matters. In the first 3 months, I rewrote their back-end security protocols, implemented real-time monitoring, and transitioned their architecture from a legacy cloud environment into something that could scale without falling apart. I slept under my desk more than once. Ordered hardware to my apartment so I could pre-configure before deployment. Bit by bit, the team began to trust me. Bit by bit, the system began to breathe again. Then came the ransomware attempt. Someone had embedded a malicious payload through a vendor backdoor. It should have taken us down for weeks. Instead, we were back online in 6 hours. That was the day the CEO, Alec Roth, shook my hand and said, "You may have just saved this company." 2 weeks later, he offered me a full-time role, Director of Systems, Equity, a real seat at the table. I didn't even hesitate. Over the years, my title changed. My responsibilities grew. I built the tech division from scratch, hiring smart, hungry people like Ava, who ran security like a fortress, and Dev, whose algorithms could catch data anomalies faster than any system on the market. I introduced AI-assisted diagnostics that cut hospital readmission rates by 12%. Built proprietary tools for clinical trial modeling. We became the backbone of Halcyon's reputation, quietly delivering on promises the business team barely understood but eagerly sold. Still, I remained invisible. That was by choice mostly. I never liked being out front. But there were times, like at our all-hands in 2020, when Alec would look at me during his speech and say, "None of this would be possible without the infrastructure Marcus built." Moments like that kept me going. Moments that made me believe maybe I'd found a place I could belong again. Looking back, maybe that belief was the first mistake. Because when you give everything, people start thinking it came easy. They forget the fires you put out, the nights you didn't sleep, the choices you made when no one was watching. They forget that systems, like trust, only look effortless when someone's working hard behind the scenes, and I had worked harder than anyone. I wasn't just part of Halcyon, was the reason it stood at all. The betrayal didn't come with warning sirens. It came with wine glasses and practiced smiles. It was early spring when Damon, the COO, invited me to lunch. He said it casually, as if we hadn't skipped one-on-one meetings for nearly 2 months. "Just want to catch up," he'd said in passing, the way someone tosses a match without checking where it lands. We met at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the river, one of those sleek places where everything smells faintly of citrus and ambition. The waitress brought a bottle before we'd even ordered. Damon poured generously. I didn't drink. He started with praise, of course. How much the company owed me. How my loyalty had never gone unnoticed. How I'd carried Halcyon through more storms than anyone else on the executive team. I waited. I'd been through enough board meetings to know when someone's building a runway to crash something gently. Then he said it. "We've decided it's time to move in a new direction." He didn't stumble over the words, didn't blink. Just kept talking about strategic shifts, leadership realignment, and next-gen transformation. I let him speak. Let him rehearse the version of the story that made him feel less like a traitor. When he mentioned the board's enthusiasm for Tyler, a 27-year-old with a flashy resume and a last name that matched one of our top investors, I nearly laughed. Tyler Hensley, Stanford grad, interned at 2 big tech firms, son of Meredith Hensley, who had recently joined Halcyon's board after leading a major investment round. He had shown up 2 months earlier as a strategic consultant shadowing product teams. Now he was stepping into a leadership role. Mine. I looked at Damon, really looked, and for the first time saw how relieved he was. Relieved that I wasn't arguing. Relieved that I wasn't making a scene. He slid an envelope across the table, NDA paperwork, an exit transition schedule, all dated and signed. The plan had been in motion long before I ever sat down. "We'll make an internal announcement. After the quarterly all-hands," he said. "You'll have 6 weeks to support the transition." I nodded. Told him I understood. I didn't. Not the insult. That I understood perfectly. But the assumption, the quiet, smug certainty that I would just fade out, turn over my life's work, smile on the way out, that's what I couldn't process. When I got back to the office, my admin credentials had already been downgraded. I wasn't even on the leadership Slack channel anymore. As I sat at my desk watching the team around me laugh, type code, still unaware, I felt something shift. Not anger, not panic, clarity. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted everything I built, the systems, the architecture, the resilience, and they wanted it without me. What they hadn't realized, what they never bothered to ask, was how much of Halcyon's backbone had never been written down, and how much of it still lived in me. It's strange how quickly a place can become part of you even when you never intended to stay. Halcyon wasn't supposed to be my home, it was a bridge, something to occupy my mind while I figured out what came next after leaving the military, after the quiet unraveling of a marriage that had already begun to decay while I was still deployed. We never fought. That was the problem. We just became 2 people surviving in parallel silence. She left a note on the counter. I need something different. I never asked what. When I walked into Halcyon's office for the first time, I hadn't even unpacked my apartment. I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, still having nightmares I didn't talk about. They'd just been hit with a compliance violation and a leaked clinical data set. 3 senior engineers had quit. The CTO, visibly burned out, introduced me in the Monday meeting and then resigned the next day. I inherited a mess no one wanted to touch, but messes make sense to people like me. There's something satisfying about pulling order out of chaos. I wasn't hired for vision. I was hired to keep the ship from sinking. So I patched the holes and started laying new code where the walls were weakest. The early days were brutal. 20-hour weeks turned into 80. Servers overheated. Deployments failed. Ava, then a junior engineer, used to bring me coffee at midnight while we debugged firewalls that shouldn't have existed. We didn't talk much back then, but we trusted each other. That was enough. Dev joined later, straight out of grad school. He wrote clunky code at first, but he worked harder than anyone I'd ever seen. I gave him a chance. He gave me everything back. After the ransomware attempt in year 2, I pitched a 5-year overhaul plan to Alec, the CEO. We met in a hotel conference room with a whiteboard and a cheap projector. I told him if Halcyon wanted to be anything more than another failed health tech name, we had to rebuild from the ground up. He listened, asked good questions, then said, "You've got the keys. Just don't crash it." That was the moment I stopped thinking of myself as temporary, and I didn't just build systems. I built a culture, one where the engineers were allowed to think, not just execute, where people like Ava could say, "This isn't secure," and be heard, where burnout wasn't a badge of honor, and no one worked weekends unless something was truly on fire. I built tools no one asked for, but everyone used. A custom monitoring framework that caught errors before they hit production. A patient data model that helped improve diagnostic accuracy across multiple AI models. I documented what I could, but some things I just carried in my head. Shortcuts, logic trees, workarounds only. I understood because I'd lived inside the systems for years. I stayed through 3 restructurings, 2 office moves, and more nights than I can count staring at error logs until dawn. I stayed when Alex stepped down and the board reshuffled leadership. I stayed because I believed in what we were doing, because Halcyon, messy as it was, gave me a second life. I stayed out of loyalty, and maybe that was my real mistake, because in business, loyalty is a currency that devalues the longer you hold on to it. I gave Halcyon everything I had, not for money, not even for recognition, but because I thought it mattered. I just didn't realize they'd stopped thinking the same about me. Looking back, the signs had been there for months. Not dramatic ones, no shouting matches or sudden demotions. Just the quiet shifting of furniture behind a closed door. It began subtly. I noticed my access to certain shared drives started lagging. At first, I chalked it up to IT migration issues, until I realized the documents missing were executive reports I used to review weekly. Then there were meetings I wasn't invited to. Planning sessions I would normally lead, now marked confidential on the calendar. Ava mentioned one casually. "Funny you weren't there," she said. Tyler asked about the core systems, said he was exploring ways to modernize them. Tyler. He had arrived under the guise of strategic advisory, a role with no boundaries and too much access. Young, sharp suit, Silicon Valley confidence. He asked good questions, smiled often, but something about him felt performative. The kind of person who looked you in the eye while memorizing what was behind you. He showed up to team meetings with half-understood lingo and suggestions that felt lifted from a LinkedIn post. Still, I stayed neutral, observed. Then one night, while reviewing system logs, I noticed something odd. Tyler's credentials accessing modules he shouldn't have had clearance for. Not just poking around. He'd viewed infrastructure maps, disaster recovery files, and sandbox builds for tools. I hadn't released company-wide. I flagged it internally, masked it as a standard audit alert, but made a note. This wasn't curiosity. It was reconnaissance. More quietly, HR started shifting chairs. A mid-level engineer was suddenly promoted to a liaison role between departments. I wasn't consulted. Someone in finance asked me for a system summary I'd already submitted, twice. The board packet from last quarter vanished from my archive. Every time I asked about it, someone gave a different excuse. But the moment that truly sank in, when the air shifted and I knew I was being carved out, came in the form of silence. We used to have weekly leadership briefings. Damon, Ava, me, a few other department heads. We'd talk metrics, risks, strategy. Then Damon started rescheduling, then canceling, then dropping the meetings altogether. No explanation. Just vanished from the calendar. I confronted him, gently. Asked if something had changed. Just streamlining, he said. You'll be looped in as needed. As needed. Two words that ring louder than any dismissal. I tried to hold on to the benefit of the doubt, the way people do when they're watching. Their house catch fire, but still thinking it might just be the toaster. But the fire was real. I saw it in the way people stopped looking me in the eye, the way Dev hesitated before answering questions about project status, the way Tyler had started sitting at my desk when I was away. I wasn't being pushed out. Was already out. They just hadn't said it yet. The confirmation came not with an announcement, but with a pattern. A rhythm I had seen in battlefield strategy, in hostile acquisitions, in personal betrayals. You don't dismantle someone like me overnight. You chip away slowly until there's nothing left to stand on. I started digging, not out of spite, but necessity. I knew what it looked like when power shifted behind closed doors. I'd seen it in politics, in war zones, in boardrooms. The way information tightens, how access gets narrowed, how names disappear from CC lines without explanation. So I did what I always did when a system felt compromised. I opened the logs. Halcyon's internal logging protocol had been something I'd built myself. A hybrid layer buried deep enough that only two people knew it existed, me and Ava. When I filtered by credential tier and queried for irregular access, the results lit up my screen like a flare. Tyler's ID and another associated with a temporary contractor account had been pinging restricted documentation every other night at 2 a.m. server performance logs, legacy protocol schemas, even old backup blueprints I hadn't looked at in over a year. This wasn't oversight. It was extraction. The next day I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called Alec Roth, Halcyon's former CEO. We hadn't spoken in months, not since he stepped down for what the press called family priorities. I asked him, flat out, what he knew about the board's current trajectory. He was quiet, then said, "I shouldn't be talking to you. But Marcus, they're positioning for a merger. That's all I can say." A merger. Pieces fell into place at once. I cross-referenced SEC filings and found that Halcyon had been in quiet talks with Medinova, a medical software conglomerate with a reputation for aggressive acquisitions. Buried in one of their quarterly disclosures was a single line item, pending acquisition of emerging diagnostic IP under provisional license. Emerging diagnostic IP. They were talking about Argus, my system, the adaptive diagnostic engine I'd spent the last 4 years developing, refining, iterating. It had started as a simple anomaly detection layer. Over time, it had evolved into a full-blown modular system capable of integrating patient history, lab trends, and predictive outcomes in real time. We never officially productized it, but internally Argus was the heart of Halcyon's AI success, and most of its breakthroughs came from hours I logged after midnight. My own time, my own frameworks. I dug further. The kicker came when I found a document buried in a draft folder. Technology Value Map, pre-merger. It detailed Halcyon's projected valuation, explicitly highlighting diagnostic infrastructure and scalable proprietary systems. Again, my work without attribution. In fact, Tyler's name appeared beside several tools I had authored. They weren't just phasing me out. They were staging a transfer of intellectual ownership. They wanted my name erased, my work white-labeled, and my silence signed away with a severance check. The final blow was personal. In an old internal proposal draft, I found comments from Meredith Hensley, board member, Tyler's mother. She had written, "Marcus's role is legacy, unscalable, lacks forward-facing vision. Recommend full transition of responsibilities to Tyler before merger disclosure." Legacy. That's what I was now. They were betting I'd walk away quietly. They didn't realize they just activated the one thing I never handed over. Not the code, not the systems. Control. The moment I realized what they were doing, what they had already done, I didn't get angry. Not in the explosive, table-flipping way people expect. I got still. Cold. Focused. In my line of work, panic is a luxury, and I had already survived bigger betrayals than this. They wanted my silence. They wanted my work without my name, my systems without my ownership, my legacy without my presence. Fine. But if they were going to take something from me, I was going to take something back. I started by cataloging everything I had built. Everything. From core Argus modules to middleware integrations and the API wrappers I wrote to keep our platform from imploding under regulatory load. Every line of meaningful code was archived in private repositories, complete with timestamps, change histories, and notes. Git doesn't forget, and neither did I. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. Elijah Vega, a former cybersecurity analyst I met during a joint defense project in DC. Elijah had left government work to start a digital forensics firm and owed me a favor. I explained the situation over an encrypted call. By the next morning, I had a full forensic snapshot of all unauthorized accesses tied to Tyler's credentials and the contractor's Ghost account. Elijah labeled it what it was: digital corporate espionage. Still, I didn't want revenge for the sake of pain. That's not how I think. I wanted leverage, control, a way to make sure no one could push me out of the story I'd written line by line, module by module, over years of sacrifice. I filed 3 provisional patents that week, each for a key component of Argus. Not the whole system, but the critical pieces that made it function in medical environments: the predictive logic engine, the asynchronous validation layer, and the compliance-neutral encryption model I'd built after the 2020 audit crisis. All 3 had been conceptualized and documented before I ever signed an employment agreement with Halcyon. I had the receipts. Next came licensing. I set up a digital licensing framework hosted externally, completely independent of Halcyon's infrastructure. It would quietly monitor every Argus instance and, when the time came, verify activation keys. If keys failed to validate, or expired, the system would begin a soft shutdown protocol. Not destructive, just disabling key features, until the license was properly renewed. Clean, legal, precise. Then I turned inward. I called Ava first. She'd always had a sharp sense for when something was off, and I didn't need to explain much. When I told her I was leaving and asked if she was still loyal, she didn't hesitate. Always, she said. Dev was next. I found him after hours, headphones on, writing test cases in a darkened office. I laid it out plainly: the betrayal, the stolen code, the merger. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "What do you need?" What I needed was trust. What I was building was Plan B. By the end of the week, I had a secured backup of every system interaction, every update, every digital fingerprint that proved Argus wasn't theirs. It never had been. Halcyon, thought I, was just another engineer they could bury under a new title and fresher face. They forgot who I was. I don't build things to be replaced. I build them to outlast the people who think they own them. By the time the internal announcement went out, Marcus Langley will be transitioning out of his role as Director of Systems over the next 2 weeks. I had already finished mine. I was done waiting for justice to find me. I was going to hand-deliver it. The day after the announcement, I watched from the back of the all-hands meeting as Damon spun the usual narrative. Fresh perspectives, strategic realignment, deep appreciation for Marcus's contributions. Tyler stood beside him, hands folded like a polite prince accepting his crown. I didn't speak, didn't look at anyone. I just smiled, as if I was already somewhere else. That evening, while the company celebrated the future, I sat at my kitchen table finishing the final configuration. 3 key components of Argus were now bound to the external licensing system I had built: the logic interpreter, the interface controller, and the client feedback pipeline. Nothing malicious, no sabotage, just a legal framework that required authentication, a system designed to protect itself from misuse. Then I uploaded the updated documentation to a secure private server and sent a time-stamped copy to my attorney, along with the provisional patent confirmations and email threads from Alec and Meredith acknowledging my ownership of Argus in its early development. I had more than proof. I had the story, the timeline, the evolution, the paper trail of intellectual ownership that preceded any Halcyon NDA or employment clause. They'd missed that in their rush to erase me. They hadn't taken the time to ask what I'd brought with me when I walked through their doors the first time. That weekend, I sent out one message, to Damon, to HR, and to Tyler. Please be advised that Argus system modules include proprietary technologies protected under provisional patent filings. A formal licensing agreement is required for continued use beyond June 30th. Documentation available upon request. Happy to discuss terms. On Monday, my inbox was quiet. Too quiet. Then, Tuesday morning, I received a legal notice from Halcyon's counsel stating that the company considered all technologies developed during my tenure to be company property, standard boilerplate. They believed I'd blink. Instead, I forwarded the message to my lawyer and then made a second call to Medinova's lead counsel. I had found her name in a news blurb about a recent acquisition. The conversation was brief, professional. I told her I had concerns about misattributed IP being used in Halcyon's merger proposal. She listened carefully and said, "Please send everything you have." I did. That same afternoon, Tyler called a systems meeting. Without me, Ava went anyway and took notes. He tried to present a new architecture plan, one that replaced key components of Argus. Within minutes, Ava told me later, it was clear he didn't understand how the layers interacted. His streamlined design would break under the first real-time data load. Dev asked one question: how will this handle cross-regional compliance flags? And Tyler froze. Wednesday, Halcyon's internal servers began to log license verification pings. Thursday, the first expiration notice appeared in the sandbox environment. Friday morning at 9:03 a.m., Argus's core modules stopped responding in production. By 9:20, Halcyon's diagnostic AI system, used in 14 partner clinics, was effectively offline. At 9:32, I received a call. "Marcus," Damon said, tight-voiced, "we're having a system failure. Did you do something?" "No," I said calmly, "but your license did expire. I'm happy to walk you through the renewal process." Silence. Then quietly he asked, "What are your terms?" The tables had turned, and I wasn't offering payback, I was offering clarity. By the end of that Friday, Halcyon was in full triage mode. Clinics were calling. Partners were demanding answers. The diagnostic system, once their crown jewel, was a blank console prompting users to verify license credentials or contact the developer. Tyler disappeared from the office mid-afternoon. Damon stopped replying to emails altogether, and HR sent a terse message scheduling an urgent exit interview clarification with me for Monday. Too late. Over the weekend, I received a formal letter from Medinova's legal department. They were postponing the acquisition pending resolution of IP ownership disputes. Attached was a request for a direct consultation to verify the authenticity of the Argus technology and its development timeline. I responded within the hour, providing a curated timeline, source code logs, and a notarized licensing chain. It was clean, verifiable, and left no room for debate. Within 48 hours, I went from being the ghost they erased to the architect they couldn't move forward without. On Tuesday, I met with Medinova's executive team in a sleek downtown office that smelled of polished wood and negotiation. Their VP of Strategy, a woman named Reema Singh, sat across from me and didn't bother with small talk. "We'd like to license Argus directly from you," she said, "independently of Halcyon, with you leading its integration post-acquisition." She slid the offer across the table. The numbers were double my previous salary, with full control over implementation, remote flexibility, and a 3-year consulting agreement. I read every line carefully. Then I signed. Halcyon, meanwhile, was unraveling in silence. Tyler's LinkedIn quietly changed titles from Director of Systems to simply Technology Advisor. 2 weeks later, it was scrubbed entirely. Internal rumors floated that he'd decided to pursue other opportunities. The truth was, 3 major partners had threatened to pull their contracts after system failures jeopardized patient diagnostics. One even sent a cease and desist citing misrepresentation of technical capabilities. Damon, for his part, held on longer. He tried to salvage the narrative, offering minor PR spin and internal town halls, but his authority had already dissolved. By the time Metanova officially acquired Halcyon, Damon was reassigned to a non-operational liaison role. Title intact, power gone. A desk in a hallway no one walked through. I never asked for revenge. I asked for recognition, ownership, and dignity, and I got it. A month later, Ava officially joined me at the consulting firm Metanova helped me launch. Dev followed soon after. Within 6 months, half my former team had transitioned over, not as subordinates but as partners. We built a culture we never had to protect from the inside out. Transparent, precise, human. One quiet Friday night, I drove out to a cabin near the lake I used to visit before the world got loud. I stood on the deck as the sun slid below the tree line, holding a mug of coffee and the kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. No fires to put out, no knives in my back, just peace. Earned, not given. I thought of Halcyon then, not with anger, but with clarity. They had underestimated the one thing they never bothered to understand. I wasn't just a builder of systems. I was the system. And when you try to cut out the core without a backup plan, you don't just lose a person, you lose everything they held together. This wasn't just a story about a man losing his job. It was about what happens when a company forgets where its real value lies. In the corporate world, loyalty is often framed as a virtue, but too often it's treated as a weakness. What Marcus did wasn't sabotage. It was self-preservation. It was strategy. And above all, it was a reminder that intellectual property isn't just about code or patents. It's about the people who built the vision when no one else could see it. He didn't destroy the system. He designed it to protect itself. Quietly. Legally. Ethically. If there's one takeaway, it's this. Know your worth. Document your value. Protect your legacy. Because in a world where companies are quick to replace people, the ones who stand out are those who architect not just systems, but leverage. What would you have done in Marcus's place? Let us know in the comments. Your perspective might be the insight someone else needs right now. And if this story made you think differently about your own work, your worth, or the silent builders around you, don't forget to like, share, or simply subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but to keep these conversations alive. Some stories deserve to be told. Others, to be remembered.